present here and now. And in the awareness of God's presence, let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence, to allow ourselves to be the recipients of your love, your wisdom, your guidance. And in this we give thanks. So it is that together we say, Amen. Walk a mile in her shoes, number 2. I didn't want to waste the rearrangement of electrons to create a new title for this talk this week. How many of you participated in the walk yesterday? And that was quite an event. We decided not to ride the bus down from Boulder because the 2 bus stops on our way had long lines, and I'd heard that they were not going to put in any extra buses for the incoming route. So we had decided to ride anyway, or to drive anyway, and we ended up parking not too far away, about 10th and Clarkson. So that was about a 20-minute walk down to the Civic Center. But both Shannon and Alexandria went with me yesterday, so that was fun. We had to leave early. Jake was due at the Guitar Center at noon, and he was babysitting, so we had to get back in a reasonable time frame. We got back about 11:30, something like that, to allow him to get into work. But it was inspiring. It was some of the placards were not meant for children.
More
Huh?
the chance.
Yeah. So and I saw that Channel 9 in their news coverage online, they had a video up online, but they had a warning. Some signs are not, how did they phrase it? Anyway, they acknowledge that some signs that they may zoom in on may not be appropriate for public consumption. But so what I was struck by was that there was a great deal of enthusiasm, and some of that enthusiasm was focused on anti, and others of the enthusiasm was pro. Pro women's rights, pro human rights. And I'm reminded of Mother Teresa's response to someone who had asked her if she would join the anti-war movement. And she said, no, I will not join any anti-movement, but if you have a movement that is pro, let's talk. So I think that is really an important distinction to make, is that if we are going to have a substantial change in our society, that we need to orient that change towards the pro rather than the con. 2 weeks ago, I'd given a talk on offering a new name, and we had also, I had requested that if you are so inclined, to write a letter to yourself with the intention of the letter to help you fulfill the living of that new name, and that I would, and to bring it in, and I would mail it to you at the end of May, first part of June. So I have a number of letters on my desk that are awaiting posting. So for those of you who submitted a letter, look to the first, second week of June of receiving that. So last week I guessed that some of the comments, some of the requests would be related to compassion, and I offered a talk on compassion, walk a mile in her shoes. And frankly, I wasn't even thinking about the Women's March coming up, and I had not decided to participate until, I don't know, Wednesday or Thursday. Shannon asked me if I was going, and it took me just a fraction of a second to say yes. So we went down there. And so the talk today is a reflection of some of the topics that were requested that I cover. And those topics, including practicing citizenship and advocacy, interesting in that we were participating in the walk yesterday. Learning to reach across the aisle, boy, is that ever a significant need at this point in time. Courage, let your light shine and be courageous. Physical healing, there were 2 people that had requested that. And an end to inertia, and I'm guessing that that's the inertia that we all experience when we are comfortable in whatever it is that we're doing. And serving God through serving mankind, and the question, what is transformation? And not just surviving, but thriving in our current national climate. So of these topics, certainly several of them seem to go together. And what we're going to be talking about today is advocacy and learning to reach across the aisle. Some may say not just surviving, but thriving in our current national climate belongs there. But actually, I think I'm going to cover that one in a separate talk. So if you have a desire to write a letter to yourself, there are envelopes filled with blank pages out there, almost blank pages, on the desk, and you can fill those out and bring them in to me. But we're going to be looking at these topics, and if you have other topics that you would like to see me cover over the course of the next few weeks, make a note of those on the sign-up sheet. You don't have to put your name, just in the name area, just indicate the topic that you would like to have covered. So, compassion. Compassion, compassion, compassion. You know, there's in this climate, and I heard the last part of your comment, so I'm thinking that this is going to flow with that. But in light of the need for our nation to come together, we're having these conversations about audience size and winners and losers, and it's easy to get caught up in that conversation, right? Winners and losers. Oh, well, I've got this to say. Boy, am I guilty of that. And this talk is really for me. Okay, you all can participate and witness this talk, but frankly, this talk is for me. So here we go. There's a lot of passion around these conversations, right? And there's passion around the response to these conversations. And so it is. It's like we have a box of mirrors, and we inject a photon into that box of mirrors, and that photon is just going to continue bounce back and forth unless there's some intervention that occurs. And the question is, are we, collectively and individually, are we able to intervene? Are we able to assess and respond with some moderation of our natural instinct to react? we have natural instincts to react, right? I mean, this goes back from a evolutionary standpoint. We have been very successful in reaching this point in time because our ancestors were successful in reaching the age of procreation, right? And they were successful in reaching the age of procreation because when danger arose, they were able to respond effectively to that danger such that it would preserve their life. Now, injuries may have occurred, disappointments may have occurred, but nonetheless, they were able to survive and to provide for that next generation, which we are the ultimate product of. The idea, though, that there is a natural reaction to a dangerous stimulus or an uncomfortable stimulus does not mean that we have to fulfill that natural reaction, right? That is, we can say, well, take a breath, what's in the best interest of all, and step onto a path that indeed yields a resolution rather than a continuation of the conflict that we are encountering. And that, I will have to say that it's not because of, but rather the election season that we just survived exacerbated the polarization in our country. And certainly the polarization is acknowledged by many, but how do we respond to that polarization? It's up to those of us that are willing and conscious to make the intervention necessary to ensure that it's not just a continuation of that photon bouncing around in this box of mirrors, that we in fact intervene to say, this is not leading us to the outcome that we really desire. And so that outcome is a coming together, even in light of our differences of opinion, a coming together so that we can A, agree to disagree, but B, to find common ground so that we are not in a legislative deadlock, so that we are not in a regressive or stasis or regressive condition in our country, that we indeed are progressing to the fulfillment of the needs of our citizens. And so actively advocating for a position does not mean that we need to be in conflict. We can have differences of opinion without having a war. We can have differences of opinion because of either different worldviews, different assumptions, different perspectives on what is going to solve whatever identified problem we have. And that process of advocating without warring is something that I'm going to talk to you about this morning. Even though we have these very polarized opinions, it is still necessary for us as a citizenry to move forward, to be responsive to the needs of ourselves as well as to the needs of others. I mean, we are not on this planet by ourselves. Everything that we do affects others, and everything that other people do affects us, whether it be in a very subtle way or a very obvious way. And so having the recognizing that we have a responsibility to achieve a common understanding and a common path towards this progress, whatever it is decided upon, is really important. it is going to allow us to heal the divides. It's going to allow us to be more effective in how we, what resources we use to address the problems that we have, as well as to gain a sense of internal peace that will allow us to find a fulfilling and satisfactory outcome to our condition. Well, Jesus offered us this. Oh, wait a minute. Remember that missing quote from last week? I found it. Apparently, when I create the slides on my machine and I transfer them to the presentation machine in here, and apparently before I made the transfer, I hit delete on that slide, and I was certain that it was there, and so anyway, that was on me. But I did put this quote up on Facebook. How many of you saw the quote on Facebook? Okay, all right. So if you don't know that we have a Facebook page, we do. If you look at the bottom of your bulletin, you'll find the address of that Facebook page. But just search Facebook for Living Water Spiritual Community, and you'll find it as well. But here's the quote: "We must not seek to defeat or humiliate the enemy, but to win his friendship and understanding. At times we are able to humiliate our worst enemy. Inevitably, his weak moments come, and we are able to thrust in his side the spear of defeat. But this we must not do. Every word and deed must contribute to an understanding with the enemy and release those vast reservoirs of goodwill that have been blocked by impenetrable walls of hate." Boy, is that appropriate for this time. And with respect to the marches that occurred literally around the world, I think there was a total of some 660 marches that occurred in cities around the world, as well as a significant part of that were marches that occurred here in the U.S. Obviously, there is passion around this issue, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. But this quote is so appropriate for our consideration as we look at the conditions that have generated the passion that was evidenced yesterday in the participation of literally millions of people around the planet. We must not seek to defeat or humiliate. Boy, how tempting that is, right? I mean, I know personally, as I am responding on Facebook, that, if I can find a proof of my point, boy, I'm right there willing to present it. And how does that make me feel? Giddy. But giddy doesn't solve the problem, does it? It doesn't persuade. All it does is causes the defenses of the other to rise up. You see why I'm saying that this talk is for me, right? Okay. So, this idea that we must allow ourselves to participate in a compassionate way, to interact in a compassionate way, not to thrust into the side the spear of defeat, but rather to allow the other to save face while offering a new perspective for their consideration. Not to shove something down their throat, but to present a perspective that allows them to consider it without their defenses being thrown up. Believe it or not, Jesus had something to say about this. In Matthew 5:38 to 48, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evildoer." Well, man. "But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, boom, turn the other one also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. In the Greek, it's be complete as your heavenly Father is complete. And I think that that's an important distinction, because perfection is not something that we think is possible, right? I mean, our common understanding is that, well, I made a mistake. Okay. And that if I were perfect, I wouldn't be making a mistake. In fact, if I were perfect, I would never have made a mistake, because the perfection that I am supposedly experiencing now would be founded upon perfection in the past. I mean, there is just an impenetrable cell of logic that prevents us from accepting this idea that we are perfect. But complete does not necessarily require completion in the past, right? It only means that we have accumulated, we have come to a point of fulfillment, and that at this point in time, we are complete. So this idea of be complete as your heavenly Father is complete resonates at least with my logic and with my heart to say, oh, yeah, I can do that. I can be complete, because completion is really a matter of choice, isn't it? Perfection is a matter of manufacture or creation, whereas completion is a matter of choice. And I choose to be complete. So this idea then that Jesus is offering us here in these 2 passages, if you will, that we have the opportunity to make the choice to be compassionate, to be willing to see the other's perspective and allow the other's perspective allow our perspective to be conveyed to the other. Well, that is easily said, but how do we do that? It's interesting that a secular Jew came up with the process that we can use. And it actually has been a very effective process. It's been a process that's been used in the resolution of disputes among villagers in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where, Israel is not all Jewish, right? Israel has Palestinians living in it, and those Palestinians are, if you will, the minority. I mean, they are the minority, but they are the oppressed minority within Israel. And there are Jews that are living elsewhere that also feel like they are the oppressed minority. But this process of nonviolent communication developed by Marshall Rosenberg is a process that allows each person in the interaction, each person in the relationship, to be able to observe how they are, what's up for them at the present time, to be able to identify how they're feeling about that, and out of their feelings, identify the needs that they have, and out of those needs, be willing to make a request of the other, of something to say or do, something that the other can provide to fulfill one's own needs. Okay. So that's a broad brush of it. Let's take a look at it in detail. This compassionate communication, or nonviolent communication, I prefer compassionate communications as a label, because it really is about compassion rather than lack of violence, right? It's not anti-violence, but it's pro-compassion. So this process is one that intellectually it's easy to understand. But in our habitual life, where we are responding out of our habits of thought, out of our habitual reactions, it's difficult to implement because we have to be willing to take a step back and to consider the current condition, consider the current relationship without all of the baggage that often is drug into every relationship we have. So this process is one that is, it's quite possible for you to learn it by yourself, but it's much more effective for you to learn it in a group. That's why we're going to have a class coming up on February 11 and February 18, 2 Saturdays, 10 to 4:30, with a half-hour lunch break. It will be 12 hours of classroom time that will be mostly workshop, mostly interactions, mostly breaking the habits of our normal instinctive responses in situations that can cause conflict. So this workshop that's coming up on February 11 and 18 is going to allow us to learn how to respond responsibly. And we're going to be covering these 4 points and practicing these 4 points. Observation of the inner and A and D. I've noticed I've got a weak D on my keyboard. It sometimes doesn't respond. It's observation of the inner and outer. Observation of the conditions in our relationship. Observation of how I'm feeling about the conditions of our relationship. And so this first step of observation is not observation in an evaluation way. This is good, this is bad, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate, but rather just observing. Clear observation, untainted with our evaluation of that condition. And the way that this is articulated in interaction begins with when you say or do something. Okay? We'll be building a sentence here. And we would start with articulating what we're observing by saying when you say or do whatever. Our next step is recognitions of the feelings that are engendered. The feelings that are engendered within ourselves. Okay? We cannot know what the feelings are in the other. We leave that up to them to convey. Okay? But this step, recognizing what feelings we have, is articulated with when you say or do thus and so, it causes me to feel, or it makes me feel this. Okay? We're still constructing the sentence. Articulating one's own needs. When we recognize the feelings that we have, we are then able to identify what needs we have that are not being met and resulting in the feelings that we're experiencing. Okay? So, when you tell me that my tie is not straight, it makes me feel like I have been inadequately preparing myself for this talk. Right? Because I have a need to feel that I am prepared, that I am on top of it, that I am ready. Okay. Requesting of the other a satisfaction of one's own needs. So we've got this sentence, when you say that my tie is not straight, it causes me to feel like I am inadequately prepared. Because frankly, I have a need to feel prepared. Would you be willing to, new sentence, would you be willing to not mention that I have a tie that's not straight until next week or until tomorrow? Or would you just not bring it up at all? Okay? So this process of clarifying what is going on and how it's making me feel and what needs are not being met as a result of, all right, and then requesting some satisfaction of those needs. That's the whole process of compassionate communication. Pretty straightforward, right? And we need to step into it in step one. We can't first respond and then say, I take that back. I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to breathe deeply. And now I'm going to come back into this interaction. And I'm going to observe how I'm feeling or what the conditions are, both inside and out. I'm going to articulate what my feelings are. I'm going to identify what my needs are and tell you what those needs are. And then I'm going to make a request. We can't do that. We have to start step one, take a breath, observe before we spew anything, right? And that's really what this workshop is about, is how to take the step in the beginning to undertake this compassionate communication. Okay, so this is a process that we can use, and it can be an effective process if we use it. It is a process that will allow our individual interactions, whether it be with family members who voted for whatever other candidate, whether it be a neighbor who parks their car in front of our house, right, and obstructs our view of the asphalt in the street, or it be a neighbor who has a dog barking, or a loved one who doesn't keep the bathroom clean, or whatever it is. This is applicable when we feel that there is a possible conflict in our relationship. We resolve it this way. It is a process that we need to learn, and it is a process that we need to continue to practice. As we practice, we get better and better at it. But this will allow us to do several things. Number one, it allows us to identify what's going on within us and how we can resolve what's going on within us if resolution is necessary. It allows us to honor the other in our relationships so that the other is aware of what's going on within me, and in the process of articulating what's going on within me, we invite the other to let us know what's going on within them. We don't force that. We just model it, okay? As we imagine that if we are doing this on a regular basis, even on a one-time basis, but if we do this, what we're doing is we're modeling a way of interacting to the other that the other can also get involved. But the other's reactions, the other's use of this model is totally up to them. It's not up to us, right? So we can't let their either acknowledgement or lack of acknowledgement of the effectiveness of this means of communication create conflict. But we can use this to let the other know how the relationship is unfolding and what our own needs are and how we're feeling about it, in the other order, how we're feeling about it, what our needs are, and making a request of the other to resolve that which is seemingly lacking in our own, in the fulfillment of our own needs. Does that make sense? Practice, practice, practice. It is a practice that we can effectively undertake, and it is a practice that will allow us to have more effective, compassionate relations with others, regardless of what the other's objectives are. Imagine in the villages where Israelis and Palestinians are having some kind of conflict. Imagine how if there was physical violence that was involved. Imagine how difficult that would be to step back from that brink. I mean, it's kind of like the feuds, the McCoys and the thank you, that was generation after generation of retribution that was laid on the other. So this is a tool that we can use to be more effective in advocating our position, as well as participating as citizens in this community, this greater community, the world community. It is a means that we can implement ourselves to make all of our relations more effective, whether the others in those relationships are using this or not. Do you see how this can be a one-way street and be effective nonetheless? It doesn't require the other person to sign on to this process. But in our practice of this, what we're doing is we are allowing our awareness to have a positive impact on everyone else in our web of relationships. And when we have an effect on others in our web of relationship, that effect is going to be propagated through the web. The person that we speak with is going to have relations that they may in fact learn something from how we are interacting that they can then apply, or maybe they even ask the question, this is interesting. I'm feeling like we're making progress here. Can you tell me what you're doing? We can model it. So this is a process that allows us to move forward, to heal, to progress in the satisfaction of the needs of the greater community. Now, we may, in fact, our individual needs may, in fact, not be met. I mean, a person, when you ask the question, would you be willing to da-da-da-da-da, the other person may say no. That is perfectly all right. It doesn't necessarily satisfy your needs, but it clarifies for the other what your needs are, and that they can, at later time, decide whether or not they want to respond to satisfy those needs. But nonetheless, you don't need to be angry with yourself for not being complete in articulating what it is that your needs are. You can just look at that and say, well, okay, that person is not willing to satisfy that. But you can then explore why they're not willing to satisfy that. And if you're willing to take that extra step, to step back into the process and say, what is going on with you where you're not willing to fulfill this, right? So notice what that does. That sets up an open communication with the other and allows you, while honoring them, to gain a greater understanding of their perspective. And boy, do we need that now. We'll have our meditation. Breathing in and breathing out. Acknowledging that within us there is that body of energy that is striving for fulfillment, completion. That there is conflict that has arisen in a relationship, or perhaps several relationships, that seems intractable. But those conditions, those situations, those relationships may in fact be just waiting for your intervention. Your aware intervention that will allow each and every one of your relationships to be healed. The conflict to be resolved. The baggage to be discarded. How would that feel to have all relationships be free of conflict? To be free of baggage? How would that feel? Can you imagine that? Even though those conflicts may be decades old, or maybe a day old, what would it be like? Can you feel the burden on your shoulders to be lifted? Can you feel the posture of your consciousness to be strengthened, straightened? Vitalized? Feel how that would feel. All of your relationships are conflict free. And recognize that this is your choice. It depends upon no one else. We are each the masters of our relationships. And in that awareness, let us come back into this time and space, sharing the words of Alleluia.